that stays. Next side. Is this on?
Yeah, it is.
All right, we're on. Okay. How many people have been out of the country? A few. All right, you've been out of the country?
Mexico.
Mexico, okay. Anybody been to Canada? Well, I'm a farm boy from Indiana, and I never thought I would get the chance to be able to be out of the country. I was very blessed to have a lady in our church in Eugene. She sponsored me a trip to Israel. Wow. I'm going to tell you, that changed my life. And 2018, at the end of about November, December of 2018. And I was told that it would change my life. And the reason she sponsored me is because I do preaching every so often. At that time, I was doing preaching over in Eugene. And she said, this will benefit you when you preach. And when you read and study the Bible. Well, I didn't realize how much it would. So I want to share that with you. I want to share this Israel in pictures, and we're going to have a little bit of archaeology. This is the first part of a second part series. The second part will be more into the archaeology, because archaeology is fascinating, because little details that they discovered, even recently in the last couple months, prove the Bible. And so we want to have that reassurance that the Bible is accurate. We don't need archaeology for that. Thus saith the Lord, I think, is more than enough. But it's sure nice to look at something physical, something dug out of the ground that proves without a shadow of doubt that the Bible is accurate. So we're going to go through here a couple little maps. This would be the map during the time of Jesus. So you have Judea down here, you have Jerusalem right there, Bethlehem's 5 miles away. You have Samaria that's smack dab in the middle, and you have the Sea of Galilee up here. And you have now, this map shows a modern day Israel, part of the Negev Desert and Eliot, near the Gulf of Aqaba, is not shown. So this is more of a modern, Israel would have been more over into Jordan and a little bit of Syria and a little bit of Lebanon during the time of the Bible. So those areas, obviously, when Israel got those back in 48, it became a state. There was defined lines. Now the Golan Heights, I don't know if the next one shows it. It probably doesn't. This is the whole state here of Israel. You can see the lower portion here that's not on this map. This is Eliot here. Solomon had a port there on the Gulf of Aqaba. This is Egypt, the Sinai Desert, and the Negev Desert here. When you have anybody heard of the north and the south in prophecy? Okay. Well, it's interesting that had a very much more wider connotation, but even there was this north and south in Israel. Okay. The south was very desolate, very just a big desert down there. So this north-south thing was even within, you had the northern kingdoms and you had the southern kingdoms of Israel. So the Sea of Galilee, I'm sorry to show here, it was a 20-hour flight from Eugene to Tel Aviv. We went from Eugene to Seattle, to Portland, to Boston, to Istanbul, Turkey, and then to Tel Aviv. It's a long way. I would do it again in a heartbeat. If I was given a chance tomorrow, I'd go back. It was that impactful. Up here I have a rock from Israel. Basically, this is the color about every rock there. And I was shocked when I was there, because when you read the Bible, you don't get context. It looks like God has taken rocks and just threw them in there, and it's boulders everywhere. I was shocked how many rocks there are in Israel. It looks like somebody just dumped them all over the land. Israel is a very beautiful land. Jezreel Valley, which we'll speak about shortly, is the most fertile area in the world. They grow things there that the ground, anybody gardeners, this ground is this dark brown in the Jezreel Valley, so it's very fertile. Again, sorry this doesn't show up very well, but this is the Jordan River. We started our trip, go back here to this. We landed in Tiberias here. And of course, that's named after Tiberius Caesar on the Sea of Galilee. The very first picture I showed here at the beginning is overlooking, this is a sunrise for the Sea of Galilee. I never just show it. Sea of Galilee is right here. This is on the other side here would be the country of Jordan in that direction. So we have the Sea of Galilee, or the Jordan River here. And some interesting things happen in the Jordan River. We have, of course, crossing of the Jordan River under Joshua, crossed by Elijah and Elisha on dry ground, healed Naaman's leprosy by having him bathe in his waters, and Elisha made an axe head float.
Is it really as dirty?
You know, this area here was not very dirty at all. This is actually, so if we go back to the map here, this is actually right here. So just as the Jordan River comes out of the Sea of Galilee, up above here you have Mount Hermon that drains into the Sea of Galilee. Beautiful area up there. Very lots of trees during the time of Christ, much more than there is here today. There is there today. It's actually fairly clean here, I think, because it's coming out of the Sea of Galilee. By the time it gets down to Jericho, in that area, it's dirty. It's pretty dirty. So this is another view of, it was actually kind of a very aqua green right here. It was very beautiful. I love the palm trees and the different things. It was kind of the imagery I had of Israel. You know, the palm trees and these type of things. Because palm trees are mentioned in Scripture being laid down as Christ was coming down off the Mount of Olives. So we're going to pay attention a little bit to Sea of Galilee here. I want to give you a little bit of context. I think it's so important when we read the Bible, when we look at stories. We just see them in two-dimensional, don't we? But when we see things three-dimensional, we can get an idea of the geography and the topography. And I want to show you this as we go through how important this is when we're really studying the Bible. The Bible is specific when it says certain details. It is amazing how specific it is. So here's a couple. We're going to go to Capernaum. We got Nazareth here, which we're not going to go to. Magdala, which is the hometown of Mary Magdalene. Mary of Magdala. And we'll drop off here at Tiberias on a little trek around here. There's the Mount of Beatitudes there also. So the Mount of Beatitudes, this was a Catholic church that was built in 1939 by the Franciscan sisters with the support from Italian dictator Mussolini. And it was a beautiful church. I just don't have time for all the pictures. There was actually a little area there that was dedicated to Pope John II. So this is a Catholic church. Many Catholic churches in Israel. I know it doesn't show up very well. These flowers are actually, if you look at it on the screen here, very beautiful flowers overlooking the Sea of Galilee. This was December. I was like, I would love to have those type of flowers in December. But you got to remember, this area is up north. This is a very tropical area. It was 70 degrees during the day in December, so it was very warm. And this is another view here overlooking. You can actually faintly make out the flowers here, but it was a very cloudy day, so it doesn't show up as well. But this down here, from the top we're at, the Mount of Beatitudes, where they believe this occurred, is actually the city of Capernaum, and we'll visit that town there in just a little bit. This is a fascinating little story. So there was somebody that, it's like, if this is really the area of the Beatitudes, there should be some way of being able to transfer the voice. Because if Jesus is on the Sea of Galilee, right on the shore, and he's talking and there's a lot of people, shouldn't they be able to hear him? What they discovered right down here, near the bottom, is a natural amphitheater. And so they tested it. They had somebody up on top and somebody at the bottom, and they could clearly hear, as I'm just speaking normally, they could clearly hear really well up this ridge. It was fascinating when they did it. And I believe there's probably a couple other areas around the Sea of Galilee that has that. There's another one on the other side that some believe is the Mount of Beatitudes. We're not particularly for sure, but it is interesting that there's a little natural amphitheater here, which makes it kind of exciting. This, for sure, is Capernaum. Absolutely, without a doubt, crystal clear, this is the city of Capernaum. They know this by some of the archaeological discoveries here. And he came down to the City of Galilee and taught them on the Sabbath. Very important. So he's coming down out of the hill country. This is why the Bible is saying this, because Nazareth is up in the hills. Now see, when I read the story, I would get the idea that Nazareth is on a flat plateau or a plain or something. No, Nazareth is up in the hills. So he's coming down. So the Bible is saying he's coming down because the topography is coming down. Just little subtle things within Scripture that make it come alive.
Is it still called Capernaum today?
It is, yes. There's not an active city there. This is just the archaeology. There's actually a Catholic church there. I believe I have it on here in a moment. It'll show that. Just a small little Catholic church. This is a part of a 4th, 5th century Byzantine synagogue in Capernaum. This is not the Capernaum or the synagogue of Jesus. But this foundation is. This is made of black basalt, which is volcanic in the area. It has a lot of it. The whole city of Capernaum is actually built with this black basalt. This is the foundation of the synagogue in the time of Christ. And they know this for absolutely sure. This was a Byzantine church built on the top of it. Very common in this area, very common in antiquity to build on top of each other. They just, they didn't do like we did. We scrape it all off and then start over again. They just build over the ruins. This here is the only exposed area of the interior of that church. These would have been like benches or some type of thing like that, they think. This is probably closer to the floor. This is the, so these here would have been at the time of Christ in that synagogue. That synagogue was so important. A lot happened there, even in this city here. What's interesting that we got Peter, Andrew, James, John, Matthew, kind of come from here, or we're from here, and there's about 500 to 1,000 people live there. And the houses were about 500 square feet. It's based on the archaeology they have. And Jesus, of course, spent about most of his time, his 3.5 years, he spent a lot of time in this town. Our guide told us, he says, there's not one place where you can walk where Jesus didn't walk in this town. That was very humbling. Very humbling to think that our Lord was walking those very streets. This is what they believe the synagogue of Capernaum, the original black basalt one, looked like. I don't think, yeah, it's up there. I don't think I have one. I had a picture on my, yeah, I don't. There's one that they showed what they believe looked like the Byzantine one on top. So this is looking from a street to that 4th, 5th century synagogue there. And we have a Greek Orthodox church here. The Sea of Galilee is out this way. It's right on the shore of Sea of Galilee. Remember, there's a fishing area here. It's a very epicenter here for that type of thing. These are the homes. These are the different foundations. These are original from 1st century Capernaum. And these were, I don't have in my notes, this has been in the last 40 years they've actually discovered a lot of this. Because before Israel was a state, it, of course, was run by the Muslims. And there wasn't any of this excavation or care whether or not it doesn't matter to them. But and in the background here is actually the little Catholic church sitting over a very, very important building. They actually believe this is not this foundation here, but the very inside is the one of maybe possibly Peter's house. They found a 1st century church built over the top of it. So that kind of got them thinking, wait a minute here, why are we revering this here particular spot in the 1st century? They show even this type of octagon type here, which is exactly the same type here as the Dome of the Rock up on this pictures here. Same type of kind of Byzantine type of building structure over the top of this. And when you go into this building, you can actually look down at the original floor of that house. They were most likely having a dirt floor. They would have this black basalt, and then they would have plaster. If you were a little bit wealthier, you'd plaster your walls. And then, if I have it, I think I have it in some of my slides, actually show beautiful colors on the side, and I think I'll show it the next time. Beautiful colors on the side of these plastered walls. Just beautiful Roman style artwork. So, and he rose out of the synagogue and entered into Simon's, this is Jesus, and Simon's wife's mother was taken with a great fever, and they sought him for her. This area here where Peter's house is not very far from the synagogue, literally within a 2-minute walk. The town is very small, 500,000 people, so you don't have to walk very far. So we're now traveling over to Magdala. So I don't think, yeah, so we're kind of coming down of the Sea of Galilee. And Magdala, of course, was named Mary Magdalene. Her last name wouldn't be Magdalene. She was Mary of Magdala. I think that's very important. This is the town of Magdala. Magdala was actually a very interesting town because there was a first century synagogue built just after Christ on it, about the 30-40 AD. Just December of last year, they found a second synagogue in that town. This is how things are always changing in Israel, and you're finding new things. So there's 2 synagogues within the city of Magdala. This was a first century fish processing town. And as you roll in, it's just a very beautiful area where they have the different type of trees. The birds, I'd never heard birds sound like this. We have beautiful birds, but the birds are so different there. And I will tell you this, because I'll forget. When I was in Jerusalem, I was woken up one night to howling, and I'm like, I'm in the middle of Jerusalem. Where's this howling coming from? So I quickly went out the window, and I noticed the howling was coming from some coyotes or wolves or something out in the upper parts of Jerusalem, out in the nowhere, and they were howling. They did this a couple nights. It was quite interesting. So this is part of that first century synagogue they found. They've since found the second synagogue. And next time I'll show you a little bit of some of the beautiful floor, the tile work that they have and they had in this synagogue that they uncovered. This is one of the boats. So from Magdala to Galilee. That was very, very humbling to do. For the Sea of Galilee. This, of course, the Sea of Galilee was a very interesting. It's not really a sea; it's a lake. Let's be real. It's a lake. It's 13 miles from north to south and 7 miles east to west. I don't know what we could compare that to. Maybe Fern Ridge is not that. That's a little bit smaller than that. But here's what's fascinating. It's 680 to 700 feet below sea level. It's the lowest freshwater lake on earth, and it's usually called the Sea of Tiberias. In the Old Testament, it's called the Sea of Chinnereth. Okay, that's interesting. That comes from Joshua. The waves can actually reach 10 to 15 feet high on a storm. Now, does that remind you of any story on the Sea of Galilee? Because what would happen is the winds would come across the Mediterranean, they pick up speed, and they flow over the mountains, and they drop right down into this Rift Valley, which the whole Jordan Valley is, and whip up these winds. And if you were in the middle of that lake, you're fearing for your life. So imagine the disciples, they get in one of these, we're talking a fishing boat, and I really wish we could have seen the fishing boat, we never did. They did discover a 2,000-year-old fishing boat. These things were not very big. And you're in the middle of this lake with 10, 15 foot waves. That's a little scary. You can imagine how scared they really were. So we take this boat across the Sea of Galilee. We're headed off to Tiberias, back to where we started here in this area of Sea of Galilee. This is Mount Ebal. Many think this is most likely where the Great Commission was done in Matthew 28, 16 to 20. But Mount Arbel was used during the 70 AD invasion of Israel. Many held out here in this mountains. This is just a sheer cliff right here. There's caves in that. But beautiful scenery. The seagulls love to come down and they would dive a boat. It was pretty fascinating. So as we're leaving the Sea of Galilee here, it was a beautiful sunset over this, coming into Tiberias. This lake it was very humbling to be there and to be in those areas. And if you ever get a chance to go, take it. Even if you have to save the money, it is such a life-changing to be there and to see these things. And as we progress, you're going to see how more intense it gets. So we come to Cana. Today it's called Kfar Cana. And this was a church Franciscan church built in 1901. It's actually the site of a 4th and 5th century synagogue, also underneath this. What they found here was fine. Now, what happened in Cana? Remember? The wedding, right? Okay. These jars here, which are made out of a stone, were found in Cana. There's another picture of it. It's interesting, their volume is very close to what the volume would have been. Whether these are it, it's interesting. That's all I'm going to say. You know, it's nothing to hang our hat on, but it's very interesting, found in Cana, these type of pots, or large jars, water jars. So we head off to Nazareth. And of course, Nazareth is located up in the hill, so you have to go uphill. It actually shocked me. I didn't realize you had to go uphill. It was actually a little backwater town. It was very, very small. Not very many people in Nazareth. And this is some of the homes in Nazareth. Now, I don't know whether or not this is just a part of a roof or it's a cave. It almost to me looks more like a cave. The problem you have is when you see things in Israel, the levels, because they build on top of each other, you're not sure whether that's actually the level of it was 2,000 years ago. So you have to be always very careful that the level could have been down farther here. This is some of the areas. They know this is Nazareth. This is the ancient Nazareth here by some of the things they found. And again, we have a little bit. You can see where they put churches and different things over these buildings or over these different houses. This is called the Church of the Annunciations, again, another Catholic church. I got in trouble here for not taking my hat off. They're very, very picky. Boy, the priest came up to me and he was adamant, take off your hat. Because they believe this is the place of the Annunciation. That's where you go, and they believe this is where she received the Annunciation. Mary did. Obviously, it's more of a Mary worship to me, it looked like. Whether this is or not, it doesn't matter. It does show, they do know that these are 2,000-year-olds. So this is 1st century. And it's inside the city of Nazareth. That's all they pretty much can guarantee. So we're going to march our way a little bit farther. So we're here on our map. This is, right here is, the Sea of Galilee. We're heading over here to a little fortress called Megiddo. Megiddo is the northern fortress that really would fortify the northern end of Israel. This is Mount Megiddo. Anybody heard of Megiddo? Armageddon. Yeah. So this are some of the remains of Megiddo. And this had 11, let me see in my notes here, it's called, it has on the very, very top, which is probably being where this right here are 11th century ruins. There's 20 different cities as they go down through the layers right here. They were on top of here, just built right on top of each other. And we know that some of these layers are what was built by Solomon. And Hiram sent to the king 6 score talents of gold, and this is the reason of the levy which King Solomon raised to build the house of the Lord, and his house, and Milo, and the wall of Jerusalem, and Hazor, and Megiddo. So he had stables here. The next time when I present, I'll show you the stables of Solomon. Now, it's funny, interesting that the kings were not to have large amounts of chariots and horses. That was against God's wishes. This again here shows the different strata layers of Mount Megiddo. This here you had to hold if you wanted to hold Jerusalem. You had to, this is a strategic point high up, because on the valley below, as we look towards, down through the Jezreel Valley, the most fertile ground on the planet, and grow anything here, you can see how strategic this valley here, if this is the way to Egypt, that's the way to Damascus. If you're going to travel an army through here, you have to come through that point. So if you hold the high ground, it's very important. The Jezreel Valley, it's interesting, had Tutmosis III through it. Alexander the Great and Napoleon came through this valley. So it's a very strategic valley, very beautiful valley. It was very green at that time. Again, this is looking off towards the town of Jezreel, which we passed in our travels. They don't really have a lot of archaeology. They do know in the city of Jezreel, they found a wine area, an area of where an orchard was. And that's interesting because in the story, didn't Ahab try and take Naboth's vineyard? So they found that in the city of Jezreel. That wasn't on our itinerary, but that would be Jezreel. Up in these mountains over here, that'd be heading towards Jerusalem. This is looking more towards the north. You can't see it, but there'd be Mount Tabor off in the distance. And this would be looking more toward, actually the next one is Mount Tabor. And my guide says it looks like a belly button, like an outie belly button. You can actually barely make it out right there. It was a little hazy that day. But again, this is a view, again, to the north, very strategic for any army coming through. Now, how many have heard of the West Bank? We've all heard. This is a very political area. Before I went, I asked the lady who was Jewish, and I asked her, I said, she spent a number of time in Israel. I said, how safe is it? Because isn't that the first thing we want to know? We've heard all the things about rockets attack and all these different things, Hamas and all these things. She said it's the most safest place on the planet. I agree. There was one instance there where I felt uneasy. We did have somebody on our trip it's very common there to pickpocket. So we were told to keep everything in your pants. Just keep it there. I would put my hand on my passport just so nobody could take it. But there was a guy in our tour that he tried to grab his cane. He had another guy distract him, and then he tried to grab the guy's cane as we were in Nazareth. But for the most part, it's a very safe country. It's not what the news media tells you, and it was quite shocking. You get this perception based from our Western idea. So this is the West Bank here. It encompasses all the way up into old-time Samaria. It goes around Jerusalem, includes Hebron here, part of the Dead Sea, and Bethlehem. And we actually, when we went into Bethlehem, we'll go there in a moment. So we're heading down here, down this map here. We're going from Megiddo, and we're going down the Jezreel, or the Jordan Valley here. This is the Rift Valley right here. And we're heading down to Jericho, which is just above the Dead Sea. And it's interesting, Jericho is 846 feet below sea level. Now it's interesting that Jerusalem is 2,474 feet above sea level. So when Jesus was traveling, I was looking at this here. Jesus walked the lonesome valley. Yeah, he spent some time alone, didn't he? And he would have walked many of these things. That was a trek. Even today, you have to have lots of water, and you have to be very good at hiking to make that trek. And these people, the priests would do it because they would live in Jericho and go up to the temple in Jerusalem. And they traveled down this road. And we'll show you the next time that road that comes out of Jericho.
How can they say it's 10,000 years old?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. Where they're getting the 10,000 years, but that's what they say. It is considered one of the oldest cities in the world. I have no doubt there. 10,000? No, I don't believe that. But good point there.
What's the name of the city?
This is Jericho.
It's Jericho.
Yeah.
It doesn't say something.
No, it doesn't. What I was going to, I just kind of was put in here, the oldest city is really what I was more keyed in on. This right here is supposed to be the Mount of Temptation, possibly. They're not sure. They built a huge, on this side of the mountain here, there's not a synagogue, but a Catholic monastery, I believe. Yes, many believe that that's probably out of here, out of Jericho. He would have put up into that area, or into that desert. We're not sure. This, though, they're very sure. This is absolutely positive without a shadow of doubt. And the next time we're going to go into a little bit of archaeology into the ruins of Jericho, the old city of Jericho, the Jericho from the biblical times, not even from Jesus' time, but from the time of Joshua. And this is looking towards the remnants right here. And to get a better view, this is what it looks like from above. And they've done very amazing excavations, and you'll be shocked at what they found. Proves without a shadow of doubt, this is Jericho, the old city of Jericho, that fell. Some of the ruins that they saw fell and fit exactly to what Scripture says, what happened. So we go up from Jericho, we travel up, 3,000 some feet above sea level, almost 4,000 above sea level, and we enter Jerusalem. And of course, in Jerusalem, everybody's noticed this. What's this?
Dome of the Rock.
The Dome of the Rock, right? This is the Temple Mount here. And I didn't know this when I went there. This actually Temple Mount area, that some of the structure on the top here was built in the 1500s. Not at the time of Christ. Christ wouldn't have seen this here. It would have been a little different. And I believe my next picture here, a little bit closer to Dome of the Rock. And right here, you can actually see the old steps right here. They believe these are probably the steps that were used during the Second Temple. And it's interesting because when, was it Jesus? I think he was, I don't know if this was exactly what he said they were whitewashed sepulchres. And it's fascinating, just across the Kidron Valley is the Mount of Olives, which had a bunch of whitewashed sepulchres. Anybody ever seen the Jesus movie? It's made about 1980s, early 1980s. And in that movie, they really do a lot of this. So when Jesus is talking about the wheat, he actually grabs a thing of wheat and he's using it as an illustration. And I think here it could have been that type of thing too. He was looking at those whitewashed sepulchres across the Kidron Valley and seeing that. So this year, some of my studies, I'm intrigued where the original temple was. There's no conclusive evidence because it was destroyed. Matthew 24 says, it would be leveled. So these walls right here, these were not here. You can actually see some of the original Herodian rock right here from the time of Herod the Great when he built. And they've extended this out. But it's a little bit different. It was a little bit different time of Christ. This man here, I know it doesn't show up very well, but this man here, if you see it on the screen here, a very dark-skinned man that just reminds me of the era. And he was just a neat man. He's just kind of giving me like a little, this is on the Mount of Olives. We're on the Mount of Olives looking over towards Jerusalem. So when Jesus was on the Mount of Olives, obviously he wouldn't be seeing this, but he would be seeing this from the Mount of Olives. And he'd be seeing a temple there. And what was Jesus doing when he saw that temple?
He was
He was
weeping.
crying, wasn't he?
Yes, it was.
So we go into the Garden of Gethsemane here. These are olive trees. These are not the original olive trees. Most likely all the olive trees were cut down, used to siege the But it's interesting about an olive tree. You can cut it and it'll come back. So they're not sure, but they think these could be some of the original trees from 2,000 years ago. It's hard to tell. Some of them are very, very old. This one here is very, very old. Not the time of Christ, but these would have been the olive trees that would have been in a garden. Whether this is the real garden, it doesn't matter. It is on the Mount of Olives, so it's near the spot. So this is what you would be looking at if you were traveling across the Kidron Valley. This is the Kidron Valley right here. This valley here runs all the way down to the Dead Sea. And there's a few people that have crossed this Kidron Valley. And the Kidron Valley is interesting because David fled from Absalom in 2 Samuel 15:22, crossed the Kidron Valley. John 18:1, Jesus crossed it, crossing this Kidron Valley. And many think there's probably even deeper than what it is today. And possibly there is a thought there was a bridge maybe across here, but they're not positive. And we get back to Jerusalem. I forgot to say this too. From the Sea of Galilee, it's about 80 miles to Jerusalem. to give you some perspective. I think that would be equivalent to maybe just above Salem from here. So that was what you travel to see in the narratives of the Gospels. Jesus going back to the Sea of Galilee. So he had to walk quite a distance. I don't know if I want to walk 80 miles. And you got to remember, this wasn't always the greatest area, topography, to walk in either. So we're traveling up towards, there's the Mount of Olives over there. We're coming around the Temple Mount here that was built. And we land into called Mount Zion. These are Hasidic Jews. And I really felt for these people. They're sitting here, their whole life is spent reading the Torah. And they sit here and they read. Now, our guide was telling us that there's an issue in Israel because these guys don't work. Their wives work. And all they do all day long is read the Torah. And so there's a little bit of a schism in Israel because they need to be providing for themselves. But they're reading the Torah here. Supposedly, this is the body of David, but my guide's like, we have not done any forensic, we have no idea. And so these are just things that the Jews hold on to. This was very dear to the Jewish people, this little area here, the way they do it. The women are separated from the men to view this. The same thing at the Temple Mount, the women are separated. So there's separation still within that culture. This is the Hinnom Valley right here. You make out some olive trees here. What happened in the Hinnom Valley? Anybody remember? They were sacrificing either Canaanites were in the Valley of Hinnom. Now I can't hardly make it out, but who's this man here? Yasser Arafat. We've moved to Bethlehem. So we're 5 miles. So we have Jerusalem Jerusalem's right here. 5 miles to the south. Only 5 miles. We have Bethlehem. As we walk through Bethlehem, I thought it was interesting because here's Yasser Arafat. It just reminds you of who you are. You're now in the West Bank. You're under Palestinian Authority. And but I'm going to tell you this. And this, as a Christian, we can look at it from a different perspective than a political as they do there. I didn't see a difference between the people. They were very loving. They were very kind. Now, whether they wanted my money, I guess that was maybe important to them. Same type of food and the same type of hospitality, both the Jews and the Palestinians. So I didn't see what is shown on the media. This is a mosque here called the area of the Nativity. This is Nativity Square. This mosque is just a beautiful little mosque. And then we have this area here, which is the Church of the Nativity. This is the entrance to it. You can see kind of this man sitting here, so it's probably about, say, yay high. This is so that invading armies can't send their cavalry into this church. And you can actually see some of the original here. This was built by Constantine the Great in the 300s. So this is very, very, very old. And as you come in, you can actually see these pillars here. These are some of the original pillars. I believe the roof is not. They found some mosaics on the floor that come from that time. And this is to venerate the area where they believe Christ was born. There's no way to know that. But again, this is Catholic thinking, and Helena, Constantine's mother, went around the whole area of Israel. That's a holy spot, that's a holy spot, that's a holy spot. Ironically, it was fascinating. They would, and I don't know if I don't remember this next time, they had these little pieces of wood, they think they're from the cross. There are so many of them that they have more than the cross would be. All over the world, in the different areas. So they're relics and things like that. You just have to take it with a grain of salt. And so this is some of the absolute over-the-top ornamental stuff within this church. This church is actually shared by many other faiths, Greek Orthodox and a few of the others. They have their little spot. So we come to this place right here. This is called the place of the skull, or called Golgotha. Now Golgotha means in Hebrew the place of the skull. And the place of the skull, the word Calvary, or Calva in Latin, actually means skull, and where we get our word Calvary from. And there was a main road that led right beside this, and I think this picture right here shows it. There's a main road, you can see camels. This is the place of the skull right here. This was a main road out of the city. So the Romans, when they crucified somebody, they always would crucify them on main roads. And they said there was crosses all the way to Damascus after the siege of 70 AD. Just line the road up with crosses and crucify. So I don't know if you can pick out where the skull is. This picture doesn't show it very well. Maybe the next picture will. Can you kind of make out the skull right here? There's the two eyes right here, and there's the nose. You can't see it very well. You can see it on the computer a lot better. I don't think I have it. Yeah, it shows up in this picture here. The two eyes actually face on. It looks better. But they believe this is somewhat the general area. This is outside the city. That's very, very important. It's outside the city because it says he was outside the city walls. We come to the garden tomb. There was a garden right near it, according to the scriptures, the narrative. And we come to this garden tomb. This here, they believe, is the tomb. Not exact, but this is the tomb that's in this garden, right near the skull, the place of the skull. And it's interesting because it's actually a tomb that's been barely used. Now, that would seem conducive to possibly Christ. Again, not for sure, but this does seem to fit with the area of the skull. It's in the same garden. And they found some other things like wine press from 2,000 years ago. So they know this was a garden 2,000 years ago, looking at the archaeology. Now we enter now the City of David. This is the area that just fascinates me, is the City of David. These right here are 3,800-year-old fortress by the Jebusites. Now the Jebusites controlled Jerusalem during the time of David. These are 3,800-year-old foundations of that original fortress. And also there was a fortress that protected the Gihon Spring. And we'll get to that in a moment. These, though, on the other side, are what they are almost assuredly believe this is David's own palace. Just based on the archaeology that they have. This would probably, they know it was a royal palace. And it fits the time frame. These rocks would have been some of the framing or the outside wall of that palace. And as you come down off that palace, you'll see this. This is even older. Some of these areas are even older. They believe that possibly the palace extended out over this, and some of these walls, these terraces, would help to support palace. Now, we don't have time to really go through this, but David took the stronghold of Zion, same as David. He went up the gutter, talked about to smite the Jebusites. And that would have been the fort. On top there, that we looked at earlier, just a couple of slides earlier, that would have been the fort that he would have taken. And then established his kingdom on that. And later on, many of the other kings of the Davidic line would use that same palace in the same area. Many believe this is probably Nehemiah's wall, the original from Nehemiah. So this would have been part of the outside wall right here. It's interesting that I took this picture because this was a view down into the Kidron Valley from the point or the perspective of David being in his palace. Do you think of a story? Bathsheba. Look at these tops of these houses here. In Israel, they have a lot of flat roofs. They live on top of their homes too, and you know, they do things. There were play structures in Jerusalem on top of the houses. So here he is looking down, possibly Bathsheba would be on top of his roof. You can see the perspective. He's up high looking down. So now when you look at the topography and read the Bible, you get a little bit of what's going on in that story.
You guys have really good eyesight.
Yeah. Yeah. So now we're traveling down through an ancient, this is actually modern here, but it goes down through an ancient, more Canaanite. I know this picture doesn't really show up well. This is the Pool of Gihon. The Gihon Spring was the water source for Jerusalem. This pool is actually where Solomon was dedicated, at this very pool right here. They know this for a fact, just based on the archaeology and where this is positioned in the area of the City of David. This pool is dry now because Hezekiah, afraid of the Assyrian army, diverts it from the Gihon pool and diverts it over to what became the Siloam pool later on, because he wanted the water source inside. The Gihon spring is outside the city walls. It's protected by towers, but it was very vulnerable. Okay, and so when you think of that story, in Hezekiah, when they made this tunnel, it was fascinating. They made this tunnel. Two guys from each end started burrowing through, and they were zigzagging like this. And I think it shows on one of my screens here, or slides. There's another view of that. When they were, two guys were coming together, and they met perfectly at the right spot. They're not sure quite how they do. They think they had rods maybe up high, and they would pound on them. And as the guys would work there, they'd see that they were running close, because the ones on top could see where it's going. He diverts the river, or the Gihon area there, so the water gets away from that Gihon pool. He was looking out for the city at that time. And let's see. Yes, this is referring to Solomon here in 1 Kings, taking Solomon down to Gihon. That would have been the pool that we just looked at. Let me get through this real quick. This is an old Canaanite, not canal, but many believe this might have been the gutter that Joab came up through. This is 3,800-year-old Canaanite area right here we're traveling through. This brings you out near this spot right here. About 30 years ago, 25, no, not even that. Actually, it's been about 15, 20 years ago. They found the Pool of Salon. It was discovered in 2004 during excavation to fix a water pipe. And this is at the bottom here, and they've since found Hezekiah's diversion to this point, and we'll look at next time, they have actually found the road up to the Temple Mount from the Pool of Salon, the ancient road that went up there for 2,000 years ago. So these are some of the remains here of this pool. You can see that it's just stair step down here. I don't know what I do. I apologize. Something's going on here. Let's go here. All right. Again, this is a little close up at that. This is what the pool looked like, they think, based upon what they've excavated so far. It was a mikveh. So it was a bathing pool, so before you went up to the temple, you would bathe here and then work your way up to the temple. And so this is what it looked like right here. The ancient road would go up to the Temple Mount here. The Gihon would have been area through Hezekiah's tunnel would have been diverted to this Pool of Salon. And it all been within the gates, or the actual walls of Jerusalem. So this shows the Gihon spring. This is the Gihon pool right here. It would have been diverted over here to this Pool of Salon within, because this was outside more of the city walls. There'd be a gate this here, but it was really a vulnerable spot. So he wanted to bring it in a little bit more protected. We're coming around, we're finishing this up here. We're coming around to, this is the Temple Mount, the Al-Aqsa Mosque right here. We'll talk about next time how this relates to the Pool of Salon on this corner here. This is the Wailing Wall. We were there at Hanukkah, so it was a lot of people there. Everybody's familiar with the Wailing Wall? Mm-hmm. Okay. This is a few pictures of the Wailing Wall. This is Herodian. These are 2,000-year-old Herodian. This would be Solomon the Magnificent. This would have been his addition on top of these are 2,000-year-old Herodian stones. And people, I think it shows, I don't know if I have it. Yeah, it doesn't, I don't have it. You can actually barely make it out. There's a little piece of paper stuffed in those cracks. People praying. All right, we're finishing up, and we're coming down from Jerusalem. We're coming all the way down here, and we're going to go down to this here called Masada. Anybody familiar with Masada? This is in the Dead Sea area. It was actually very beautiful. I really loved it down here. There's some rain kind of following in that. This is the Dead Sea. It's actually been going out. It's losing water right now, and it's because they've been diverting the water. Again, another picture of that. We're heading up this here. En-Gedi would be up past this. And we're coming to Masada. And you have to go clear the top. This was a mountain fortress. So this was a southern end fortress. You had Megiddo up in the north. You had this southern. Okay? And this was Herod's magnificent building structure that he built on top of this cliff face. This is what it looks like from the top. And I think it'll show this right here, and I'll explain what that is in a moment. This is part of Herod's palace area he had up there, some of his guest housing. And you can actually see it here, some of that built on the side of the mountain. He was a magnificent builder. This right here is still 2,000-year-old Roman remnants of the 10th Legion. Still in the desert. For some reason, nobody's ever touched it. They know that these are from when the Roman Legion, because when Jerusalem fell, the Zealots went into Masada. And they held up in Masada over 900 of them. And the Romans needed to get rid of these guys because they were going to be a pain. And they camped out there around 70 AD and stayed there until 73 when they conquered Masada. They held out for years. They had water, they had food for many, many years on top of this mountain. Some of the storehouses here where they would store the food up on Masada. This is looking at, they had a draining structure here. They had a huge cistern where they collect water. It gets rain twice a year. That's it. We were there at the one time just before the rains hit. And then they collect that into their cistern. This is actually, on that last view I was telling you, I explained to you, it looks like a ramp. This is the Roman siege ramp to conquer Masada. This is the last holdout for the Israeli people. You know, it's sad because they rejected their Christ. They rejected their Messiah, and this was the end result. All 9 of them committed suicide. They didn't want to be taken alive. These are some of the remnants of it. This is the mikveh pool up there. There was actually a synagogue on top. I mean, Herod the Great couldn't have cared less about the religion, but we'll put a synagogue up there on top of Masada. So we come to our last spot in these Qumran. And these are some of the pots that would have carried the Dead Sea Scrolls. Everybody's heard of that, right? Okay. These are some of the pictures of Qumran, where the Essenes lived. They had a beautiful view of the Dead Sea, and just some of their structures on that they lived there in one of their mikveh pools. This is some of the best preserved mikveh in all of Israel. You can see the plaster, the original plaster from 2,000 years ago is there. This is cave number 4. This is some of the last pictures we have. This is the most famous cave. Cave number 4 in Qumran. It's interesting, out of the 11 Qumran caves, all but Esther, parts of Esther, were found in these caves. So every book of the Bible was found except for Esther. It's interesting. I should do some research on why Esther was not discovered there. This, again, a focus on Qumran in that cave number 4. You know, it's an area that's very fascinating to go. And the next time we'll go into some of the archaeology, some of the archaeological finds, and how they relate to little minute details. I mean, a particular person within Scripture that is just an obscure name. And they found a little seal with that guy's name on it. So it shows that the Bible is accurate. As you travel through Israel here, you can see, as you look at the Bible now, look at it with a different point of view. That Jesus went up from Jericho. You know, you're going up, you're coming down to Galilee. Even though you're technically, you know, going north, you still got to come down to go into the Sea of Galilee. So I hope it helps you. Feel free afterwards. I have some more details here, some maps and different things. There's a little bit more detail on spring. I didn't mention this guy here. That's Sir Charles Warren. He was a British officer, did a lot of excavation. Some of his archaeological discoveries we'll talk about next time. But it just shows some areas here that might be of interest. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of courage. Pastor Beltran wanted to have more family stuff during this quarter, and I think that's a good idea, just to kind of uplift us and give us assurance. And I hope the next time we will look at these archaeological discoveries from the Bible and see how the Bible is so accurate to its minute detail, and how important it is to our faith. I think it helps strengthen our faith for sure. Do we have any song?
Let's just skip that, okay?
Okay, let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you again for your word. And Lord, we may have been a little long, but hopefully we glean a little bit of insight through pictures of the area your son walked, that you had you looked at Canaan into the area of Israel as that promised land. And Lord, we have a promised land that is much better, that we're right on the borders of. Lord, help us as we go through our days and weeks and go from here. Help us to have the faith to trust in you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.